And we're back. Now, the last video went long, but that actually highlights my point. It took me 9 minutes to do the introduction. It won't take me that long to do the body paragraphs. So as I was saying, now that you have a properly done introduction, a properly written introduction, all you have to do now is tell the story. So, what am I going to do? The first reason why we should somewhat reject the source can be found during the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a time during the 1930s in which over 1/3 of the country was out of work. It was caused by overspending in the 1920s, and it was triggered on by something called the stock market crash of 1929, or Black Thursday. If you noticed, I just list a whole bunch of reasons. This was a terribly depressed economic time in which over 100 men would sometimes compete to find one job. Because of this, it would be considered irresponsible to just assume that people would be able to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. Classical liberalism had failed. It was now for a time of modern liberalism, embodied by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the president in the 1930s up until 1945, famously said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And he meant that as the idea the government could actively shape government policies. Most people at this time were very fearful of the United States government running deficits, but he believed it was a way to trigger the economics. He believed in Keynesian philosophy that during bad times or economically depressed times, the government should spend to get them out of the depression, and then once they're out of the depression, they can save the money to pay back the money they spent when the economy was poor. Now again, that's not as worded as much as I would like, but this is off the top of my head, but I want you to think about all the specific facts, names, and dates I included in that presentation. That is what takes you up to the 5 level. And then at the end, you'll just say, this is a time that proves that classical liberalism is not enough to to run the economy, and at times the government must step in with modern liberalism. Done. And then the next one, I would come in and I would say, tell the story of Tommy Douglas from the beginning of the year, where Tommy Douglas was a boy who didn't have a healthy leg, and they were going to cut it off because he couldn't afford the operation to save his leg. Now, obviously, a little boy should not be responsible for raising the money for his own surgery for his own leg. I would go into much detail. I just don't want to waste your time on the video. That would be the second story. And then, because I said somewhat reject, I would say, however, comma, there are times when people feel that government spending and social programs can get out of control. For example, government spending of the arts is an example of unnecessary government spending, and I could talk about the Blue Ring, and I could talk about the CBC and its budget and how some people would disagree with it. Once I've done those 3 body paragraphs with 3 separate reasons, with 3 separate case studies, I'm done. Now, some people will often ask, what if I have 2 case studies for 1 reason? Go ahead, definitely you can do that. I think it's best to make sure you have 3 separate reasons, but you can have more than 1 case study in a reason if you don't know it as thoroughly as you might like. And then the conclusion, I don't even really talk about it much because all you're doing is reviewing. When we look at the above paragraphs, we can see what I said in paragraph A, what I said in body paragraph A, body paragraph B, body paragraph C. Therefore, restate your thesis. So all I would say, since this link is already on the homepage of D2L, you can then go through this and you can look at what the satisfactories look like, what the proficients look like, and the excellence ones are sometimes very, very difficult to reach. They are unbelievably detailed. Like here, if you look at this one, I'm not even going to read it, but they're talking about Herbert Hoover, they're talking about Keynes, etc. Anyways, I hope this helps. I will also post in this same announcement, I will post a link to my 2 outlines for source analysis and position papers. Good luck.